Okay, today we're working on a set of carburetors for a second gen Honda Prelude. That's 83 to 87 base model. So I'm going to tear these down for potential rebuild. We're going to have a look at all the little bits and pieces and clean up a few things, see what needs to be ordered if anything. Check the gaskets, check the jets, make sure everything is clean and tidy. Functional is the most important part. So yeah, they're kind of dirty, greasy. Looks like they've seen some abuse. Maybe not abuse, but something was definitely leaking all over them. Anyway, so first step is to just start taking off the things that we don't need. An important point when working on these carburetors is that the screws are not a standard Phillips. They are something called a JIS, which if you have a toolkit like this and you have a screwdriver set like this, you're going to see this type of bit right here that has these little like secondary things compared to a standard Phillips, which is this guy. It just has grooves in the side, but the JIS ones have an extra set of little bits in the middle that tell you the difference between the two. So most of the screws on these carburetors are JIS number 2s, and if you use a standard Phillips, it will strip the screw, which is a real pain in the ass. So make sure you have a JIS number 2 to do that. These guys don't really matter, they're just a clamp, so they can be undone with a standard Phillips. We're gonna have to pop these guys out because they normally stay on the car. So that could be a little tricky to get out. Those guys are loose, so that should be okay. It's much easier to do on the car, I can tell you that for sure, because you can use the engine for leverage to squeeze these guys out. They're a metal plate with vulcanized rubber that fits onto the carburetor, and they can be sometimes not so friendly to remove. They have a double lip inside of them, like down inside the barrel here. There's a double lip for the for it to seal properly. There you go. You can see down in here, there's like 2 ribs down inside. They fit over these 2 humps in the throat of the carburetor for sealing when this guy clamps down. Now these intake units are really bad for cracking right around here from the weight of the carburetor pulling down on them. So give those a good inspection. These ones look like they're all right, so we'll keep those for another day. Like that. Some other points to pay attention to are things like these fittings. They get badly corroded and sometimes the copper is eaten and gone. Same with this guy. This is aluminum on brass, and what ends up happening, you can see how crusty that is in there, is the aluminum pressed onto the brass, or sorry, I should say the brass pressed onto the aluminum. it corrodes because of galvanic action, which is two dissimilar metals. So this part always rots out, and it's a big spring inside of here. It's like a valve, and it's kind of like the thermostat. And what happens is when this gets too corroded, it literally will just break off and piss coolant everywhere. So you need to check this guy. This guy is totally ruined, so I'll have to take him off and replace it if we're going to use these guys. So important point to check there. All right, what's next? I think we'll try and take off these brackets here. So we're going to want to give a good fit. That fits so nice and tight. They can be quite stubborn if they've never been off before. There we go. The other thing too is you get a lot of buildup of crud in the head of the screws over time. So it's good to take a pick or a small flat screwdriver and just kind of clean the crud out of the screw so that you get a nice fit with your screwdriver. There we go. That's those two. What else do we have? This guy can stay. We don't need to take the fuel line off, but these guys are going to come out. So we need to have good access to those. If this guy is too stubborn, we might have to take this fuel line off to get some good traction on it. The screw's not looking so great. I don't recommend doing this often, but sometimes a little bit of hammering will break the corrosion, as well as seat your screw driver into the screw. Man. I will need to do a pair of vice grips, I think. All right, last resort, unfortunately. I'm going to replace this screw, so if we mangle it up, it's not the end of the world. We just need it to come loose that much even. Just enough to break the threads. And now we should be able to just turn it out. Yeah, there we go. Have a look at that guy. Pretty mangled up, not so nice. But I have more. Not the end of the world. So, I'll finish taking these guys out. These just hold the brackets in place. That's that nasty one. So now you see that's loose. You're going to want to take note of where these vacuum lines go to. It's very important that they go back in the same spot. We're going to loosen this guy off. And we're going to loosen this guy off. This thing, by the way, has some very small plastic vacuum ports on it, and they break so easily. So when you're trying to take these lines off, don't put any sideways pressure on this because it'll snap right off and come right out in the hose, and then you're in trouble. So I always like to take the line off at the other end of wherever this is going. And then I think we'll do here and here like this. So now we have a vacuum port. Now all these other ports go to the big black box that sits on the firewall, and some of these ports go to things like you know, extra boost solenoids, or they go to like the distributor, or you know, other like sensors and stuff. There's like vacuum sensors down here on the intake manifold, so you want to always make sure you either label those or something to keep track of where they need to go back. So that's all we really need to take off on the top to gain access to these guys. So then we're going to take these out from our top hats. And these guys, you just give a wiggle and they lift off, and you're going to see there's a big spring that sits on here. So you want to keep all those things together. I usually like to try and keep them on the same side as well. You've got this little guy that goes in the top of here. Make sure he goes with it. And this whole thing just kind of lifts out. And that's your slide barrel and your main jet needle. And there's a rubber gasket in here. Make sure that that stays. But that's your one side. And then we'll do the other one. These guys are usually pretty clean inside. Don't need to do anything with this stuff usually. I like to give these guys a wipe down if they're dirty, but these are pretty clean, so I probably won't. Give them a wipe off before they go back in to get any dust or anything off of them, but they're pretty clean otherwise. And like I said, these gaskets, just make sure that they're, you know, there. If you're going to be flipping the carburetor upside down, which we will be, it's good to just take this plastic seat out. That way nothing else falls out of there. But the inside of this is looking pretty clean. Hopefully the bowl is as clean, because that's the trouble area for sure. But yeah, that's looking good. Something else to check too while you're up here is just make sure that the throttle linkage is, you know, returning all the way to its stopping position. Make sure that the choke mechanism is free. Make sure that your choke flaps are moving easily, right? All important thing, these little, you know, actuators and stuff, just make sure that they're all loose and free and can function as intended. Okay, that should be a little easier. Now we've got the float bowls to take off. Down here we've got another set of vacuum brackets, so we'll have to unbolt those. They have vacuum lines on them that go to the float bowl itself. We have the accelerator. No, these are the power valves actuators. So those we're going to have to take apart and check the diaphragm. The diaphragm on those is almost always gone bad. This is the accelerator pump, so we want to take him apart, make sure that the gasket's good on him, make sure it's all clean. This little brass pipe is a crossover pipe for the accelerator pump. So whenever the throttle is pushed, there's the pump right there. So whenever the throttle is activated, which is right here, you can see that little guy pushes that pump down, and It's basically just a plunger pump that sprays some fuel up into the carburetor for acceleration or for cold starts. Everything else looks not terrible. These guys, I don't usually take them out. You know, if there's no sign that they were actually leaking, just leave them in there. There's no sense in disturbing that gasket and stuff. They usually just work fine, and you can take the whole bowl set off together and work on them with it attached. So it's not a big issue. Now it's important to remember this is a Canadian spec carburetor set. So on the American ones, there's this crossover tube actually is different. It comes up and connects in a different way, as well as there's you know, extra hoses on the bottom here. There's extra hoses on the top here. Like these ports are all filled with pipes on the American version. So you know, this is a little more basic, not quite as basic as the non-emission spec markets, but it's an important distinction. Also looking for stuff like this, right? This line has been bent. This is not supposed to have that bend to it. It's actually supposed to come straight down. So that's actually torn that vapor line. So we'll have to take that off and replace it if we're going to use this set. There's another one here. That same vapor line. It's basically just a breather that comes off the float bowl, and this goes over to the charcoal canister, kind of like a return sort of situation, because the fuel line comes in here, and then it just vents any vapors out of there, as well as here, and this just vents back into the breather, which gets sucked back into the engine, so no issue. Anyway, so brackets. We're going to take these guys. We're going to switch this for our JIS number 2, so we get a nice good fit in there. Generally, if you've got all of your screw heads are in good shape, these things come apart really well. Unless they've been submerged underwater forever. Also, I don't know if you can see, but the length is different between the screws for these caps and the screws for the brackets. They're a different length. Okay, so where was I? Anyway, these guys here are off. Now we're gonna pop that guy. And that whole assembly can be put away to the side. And that gives us much cleaner access to the bottom here. You can see there's some crud inside that vacuum port there. Okay, this guy too, you want to check this guy for you know, bad connectors, broken wiring. This wiring is really stiff, so if it was bent too much, it would probably break. But this is actually a fuel flow valve. When the ignition turns on, this opens and allows fuel to flow, and when the ignition is shut off, this guy stops. So you want to make sure that that's functioning. Otherwise, you're going to have starting issues and all kinds of running problems. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3 on each carburetor. That's going to take the main bowl off. You can usually leave this assembled, and we'll take that apart later. And all this tubing can just stay. So give these guys a little cracking loose. It's also important to note that in most markets, these carburetors are pre-adjusted. There is a little adjustment screw on the side of the carburetors, but it's preset at the factory, and if the carburetor is clean and functioning properly, there's really no need to adjust it. it should run properly without having to do that. So the first thing people like to do is mess with that screw, thinking that it's, you know, somehow out of adjustment, but it's really probably not. It's more likely that you've got a bad float, or you have a plugged needle jet, or you've got, you know, a plugged passage somewhere. Like, it's almost never going to be that adjustment. And if you do adjust it, you'll never get it back where it's supposed to be without the proper equipment to test it with. Speaking of which, I'm sure you can see right down in here, this is the part that connects the throttle shaft between the left and right carburetor, and it actually has an adjustment right here that adjusts the flow, the airflow, and these are airflow matched. So if you take these carburetors and separate them, and that adjustment changes at all, then you have an out of balance airflow mix, and it'll give you all kinds of idling problems, you know, throttle problems, just drivability in general. So I always try not to separate them if at all possible, because it's no damn fun trying to figure that out later. So these guys just lift straight up. You flip them over, and this is going to give you an indication of how much trouble you're in for. So here we have dirt down in here. Down in here you can see all this cruddy, that's old gas and dirt and stuff that's gotten into the carburetor over the years of sitting and drying. This one, you can see how it's more of a, like a dust, you know, like a pale white dust. That's just dried old gasoline. That's really easy to clean out. This one that's got black shit in it, that is that's a little different. That either got in there when we were messing around taking the top off, or more likely there was some really dirty gas that went in there. You see, this is our old fuel. It's like jelly. It's applied and pushes on this. I don't know if there's anything in there, but when that guy gets pushed down, it runs this diaphragm and pulls some fuel from the bowl in this hole right here and pushes it through here, squirts it into here, and it sprays it down the throat of that carburetor. So I'm going to set these aside for now. We'll take them apart a little bit later and have a look at that. So now the nitty gritty. So power valves are these guys right here. Turn this sideways a bit so you can see. So these little guys right here, these little needles push in. These are actually in really nice shape. There's a lot of tension on those little springs inside, and they're not stuck or seized or anything. These are in really, really nice shape. So that's really good to see, because if those are bad, it doesn't matter what you do with your diaphragm, it's never going to work properly. So those guys are nice. You can see the floats here. See how they kind of wiggle? So this is kind of an appropriate amount of spring that you want to it. This one has none. So there's something wrong with the adjustment on this guy. This little tab has gotten bent maybe, or the spring in the valve is bad and it's not putting any pressure on it. This one is good, but we'll take those apart and have a look. So then you have your main jet is here, and when you take this little guy wiggles, that's normal. He pops out, there's actually another jet underneath, and then these guys, this top part unscrews, and then there's a secondary emulsion tube underneath that also unscrews. We gotta take that out and make sure it's clean, and you know, then give it a spray down, make sure it's all good. We're gonna check the shut-off valves, the float shut-offs, and see what kind of shape they're in. Otherwise, you know, it looks pretty clean. The outside is filthy, but just goes to show you it's no indication of, you know, quality of the interior of the carburetor. So, you know, these guys were not sitting around with too much fuel in them for too long, which is good for me. Yeah. So there you go. That guy's a 7. There and there. You can see the difference in the color too. This one's really light. That's the one that had the light brown dirt in the float bowl, and this one's much darker. So this guy was either suffering from a lot of dirty fuel, or maybe the carburetor was getting some if the engine was backfiring and it was getting, you know, soot or something into here. That would explain that darker color in this one. So we'll have to see about that, but we'll clean it up. It'll come nice. So yeah, so 7mm for those guys. I think this is an 8, which is. And then down under these guys, we take these little guys out. I don't know if you can see that little guy. He's got a little tiny hole down in there that you've got to make sure is clean. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the image, but there is a little tiny hole down there. You got to make sure that that's clean. So I was interrupted. Now I need to get back to where I was. Oh yes, and so these little guys with a little hole in them. Now down in here, the jet that's in there is sometimes very difficult to get out. You need an exact size screwdriver that fits perfectly, and then you need to be very gentle with it because it's brass. So if you strip it, there's no way you're ever getting that out of there. And if it's plugged, carburetor's toast. I've got right above the camera here like 3 sets of carburetors where those valves or those jets didn't come out, and that carburetor is scrapped now. So be very, very careful if you're doing that. This guy usually comes off really easy, and then you just unscrew the bottom part and it's fine. Same with this guy, but that one down in there is a problem. What I usually use is one of these because it's got some length on it so that you have some good leverage. It goes this way, and one tip that goes this way so that you can kind of fit however you need to get the best torque on that threaded guy. Take these guys out first so that they're not in your way while you're trying to do that. Actually, I think I'm going to take the little screw part off the top first. That guy comes off. Again, got a hole through it. It's fairly large, but just make sure it's clean inside. Then we're gonna do this guy. So you can see it's a long tube. It's called an emulsion tube. It's got 3 holes on each side. Those holes can get plugged up, so you want to, check those out. So this guy you can see is dark, but if we give it a little bit of a scrub, you can see the brass underneath. So we'll scrub that up with the wire brush, and it'll come nice and polishy, shiny like the inside. And again, just make sure that the pass-through, which is really large on this one, is clean, but it is, so that's non-issue there. So this guy, again, the only way that I've ever tested it really is just by blowing through it. So you blow in here, and then you push the little valve, and you can feel the air that comes out of it. Yeah, that's working perfectly. It's fine. So he's good. So now we can try and get that guy out. So the width of the screwdriver that's going in there is extremely important. It has to be the width, the full width, because there's a hole in the center. It's like this guy, right? The only place that you have to turn it is this little piece and this little piece. Everything in the middle, like a normal flathead screw, would be a solid piece all the way across where you've got torque applied all the way. But with this one, you've only got this little tiny space to work with, and if you mess it up, you're done. So, get a screwdriver, line it up with that slot right there. And now, some downward pressure to make sure it doesn't slip. Oh, look at that. That's nice. Now you can use just a regular flathead to spin that guy up. It won't come all the way out. You will have to do one of these. But then there it is, this little guy right here. And it has a microscopic, tiny little hole right down in the center of there. And it also needs to be clear. This one is clear. You can see light through it. We're going to pass some cleaner through it and make sure that it's good, but that's what plugs 99% of the time, is that guy. And that's not good. So that's what causes most of your like idling issues and stuff like that is from this guy, is because it's the low speed jet. This guy is your high speed jet. So this needle valve actually goes in here like this, right? So this guy's, you know, usually all right. It's a larger jet, doesn't get plugged as easily, but this little tiny guy is the slow jet, and it plugs so easily. So anyway, it's good though. It's not plugged. All of our passages look pretty good. I think there is actually, if I remember correctly, there is a jet down in here, which does unscrew all the way. That's right. There's a second emulsion tube. And it's the same thing. Like, you need to have a screwdriver that's the exact width of the screw. I don't know if you can see. So that you get a good turn on that. But this guy actually comes up into the back of the carburetor, just in front of the throttle plate, which is here. So if we open that throttle plate like so, you'll see, I don't know if you can see it or not, but down in there, right there, is that little jet poking up through. And this one doesn't have it because I've taken it out. And it's also interesting to note, those are actually different sizes, American versus Canadian. The tip on this is longer. For some reason, it comes up higher into the throat on the American version. So I'm not really sure why Honda did that, but I'm sure there's a reason. Fuel efficiency, or combustion, or I don't know. Not sure. Emissions maybe. But that's that guy. So now all of our jets are out. We're going to take this guy, which is literally just held by this little pin. Get that pin out of there. Nothing holds it in, it just slides into place. And it can't come out because it's longer than the width of the float bowl. So no matter what it did, it can't go either direction, it'll never fall out. So that guy comes out, and then this guy just lifts up like this. And you can see underneath is the little shutoff valve that goes into that seat right there. Now this guy has a little spring actuator right there that pushes the float back up. If that gets weak, it won't push the float back properly. Or if this little metal tab gets bent out of shape or is improperly adjusted, you know, you can move that little tab up and down to get the right amount of shut off. So what it does basically is this goes in here and shuts the fuel off coming from the main fuel line. And when this goes down, it pulls the valve down, which allows fuel to come in. And when the carburetor fills, when the bowl fills with fuel, these guys are hollow and they float up like this, pushing up on the valve, which then closes it and shuts the fuel off. So the adjustment of where exactly that sits is important. You can't tell the angle from the picture that we have currently, but I'll do something after. The other important thing with these guys is these hollow plastic floats, they like to split right along this seam right here. And then fuel goes inside, and then instead of it floating, it fills up with fuel, and then it stays to the bottom. So the fuel valve is always open and always pulling fuel in, which then fills all the way up into all the nooks and crannies and leaks out the back of the carburetor into the motor, causing rough idle, fast idles, all kinds of stuff. So the adjustment of this and the testing of this, we're going to have to test these and make sure that they don't fill with fluid, but I'm fairly confident that these are okay. But I'm going to check them anyway because it is a very known problem. There's that, and then this little brass plate here just lifts off. Nothing major, just goes here, just take it out. And our little needle valve. It's got a pretty good ring in it, but I think it's okay. And again, the way that I test this is I put a piece of hose on the fuel line, which is over here. I'm pretty sure. Nope, right here. Put a piece of hose on there, and then I blow into it, and I move the float up and down and make sure that the valves are actually shutting off with just the weight of gravity on the floats. And that ensures that the valve is actually shutting off. So we take this guy out too. Now we've got this guy, which I'm pretty sure is a $10mm. Now these do come in the rebuild kit. Comes with a brand new set of them. I almost never use them. I've had bad luck with them not working as well as they should, but the factory ones seem to work forever. I've reused and reused and reused with no issue. So you can see this guy, it's got a crush washer right here, aluminum crush washer, and there's actually, this is a filter screen. So you want to take that out and check it and see how filthy that is. If it's full of crud, then you need to clean that, because that's your fuel flow into the float bowl. So always have an eye on that guy. But this one's clean, so that means they were running a good quality fuel filter. Doesn't look like there's any dirt or anything nasty down in there. There's a little bit of gross fuel here that was leaking out. But yeah, so that's this side. It's really, really clean in the top. I don't think we'll have to do anything at all with this guy. The float bowls will give them a little clean, but these are really, really nice. I'll just spray them down to get any little bits of dust or dirt out of them before we put them back together, but otherwise they're in nice shape. So I'll go ahead and take the other side apart. I don't think there's going to be anything significant to see or do there, but we'll take it apart anyway, and then I'll move on to the bowls and taking them apart and showing you what's in there. Okay, so good. Yeah, that looks okay too. I think there is a difference in the angle of that metal bracket though. Yeah, this one's bent down significantly more than this one is. By significant, I mean like, 0.5 of a millimeter, but Makes a difference. There we go. He's good and happy. Got the brass plate off. Oh, it's interesting to note too, these two plates are different. This one has a big long thing that goes down in there, and this one is just a little flap. So just try and keep your parts separated left and right. And let's see, 10 mil for this guy. If you're wondering why I don't clean the outside, I usually clean it after. You could clean it before too, but a lot of times what's on here is protecting it from being seized, like it's old grease and you know, like it's preventing it from corroding. Essentially, it's not corroded, it's just dirty from grease and slime from over the years. So you know, it actually works really well at protecting it. So I'm not too concerned about cleaning it aesthetically. If you had a really nice clean engine bay and you wanted to have it perfect, well, that's, you know, one thing. But you know, if you can clean it up and make it look fairly decent without having to go too crazy cleaning all of those bits and pieces. Like if you just want a decent daily driver that runs and you can go A to B, you know, fairly reliably, like you don't need to do all of that. I'm going to clean this one up, try and make it a little nicer, but it's not too bad. You can see this screen is perfect too, so no issue with that valve. So yeah, that's it. This guy looks really clean inside. I'm super impressed. I was a little worried with the outside condition, but the inside is really nice. That's a nice set of carbs. So I was saying earlier about the adjustment thing. It's actually right here. You can see right here there's a little cap. Apparently only the Canadian market has this capped. I don't know if that's true or not, but there is a cap that goes here and a cap that's right down in here, and that covers the adjustment screw because it's factory set, and then they put a cover on it so you don't mess with it. But people like to dig that cover out and then mess with the screw, and it's unnecessary. You don't need to do that. But like I was just saying, like you see all this, like it's grease, it's not corrosion, it's, you know, it's slimy, but it's keeping everything working. So, you know, I'm not too concerned about that at all. All right, these guys off to the side. I know my workbench is dirty, and you would think, oh, clean carburetor parts, dirty bench. There will be a nice pristine sheet of paper down when I go to reassemble after everything is cleaned. Right now it doesn't really matter. Okay, so our bowls, we know they're dirty inside. We know we've got a bit of jelly fuel here to clean up. Also, these gaskets, you don't really need to change them unless they're leaking. I've reused these multiple times, had carburetors apart, you know, a bunch of times and never really had to replace them. Usually there's some like gunky stuff like right here, you know, like there's some varnish or whatever. Like I'll try and clean that stuff off of it, or like around the edge right here. You can see there's a little bit of crud down in the groove. Just give that a little cleanup, just so that there's nothing on the surface of the actual rubber gasket, and then it'll seal up nice. And we'll wash that off with parts cleaner later. And yeah, usually those gaskets will work repeatedly with no problem. And these gaskets too, these guys, they're not terrible. You do get new ones with the rebuild kit, and you can put them on and it'll work fine and whatever, but I've used them successfully without, you know, having to do that. You don't have to put any sealer or anything on it. They work okay. All right, so the other thing too is if you take these out, because you have to flip them over to put them onto the carburetor, getting those to stay in place while you've got it flipped over and putting it down onto the carburetor surface, the new ones fall out every single time, whereas these are kind of like adhered a little bit from age. So if you can put them on without them leaking, I usually try. You could put new ones and be sure, but if you've clamped it down and this corner of the gasket is squeezed out here or something, it's going to leak anyway. So, you know, it's always kind of a crapshoot when you put it back together and then put it in. You've got to check for leaks. You know, when you first fuel it up, it's just the way that it is. And I try to use the original gaskets because it's easier and they're already there and they work, and why bother, right? Anyway, so we're going to flip this guy over and we're going to loosen these three. This one's all full of stuff. These also have a spring under them, so as you undo the screws, you're going to see it's going to lift. And these are special size screws. You want to make sure that they're kept separate from all the other bits. There. So you'll see there's a screw or a spring under there, and that's that diaphragm. That guy was a little crusty. We'll give him a little bit of extra cleanup after. There's our other spring. Now you can see there's, you know, some of our gelatinous fuel down in there. We'll want to rinse that out, and we'll want to spray some in here and make sure those passageways are clean. But that's the vacuum side anyway. And the interesting thing is, because this is the vacuum side, there should never be fuel in there. It should be dry like this. But in here, we're full of fuel because this diaphragm has failed and is leaking fuel into here via the vacuum. So when the engine's running and there's vacuum on here, it's actually sucking fuel out of the float bowl into here and sucking it into the engine. So this probably was not running so great on this side. Which side? Is that the dirty one? Ah, it is too, yeah. Interesting. But yeah, so that'll have to be cleaned up. No big deal. And then these guys, you pop these out. So this one's actually not too bad. It's fairly flexible still. Sometimes they're rock hard. They don't move at all. They're just a crusty piece of rock hardness. So this one's actually okay. So it probably would have worked if this one wasn't leaking. So he might be all right. This guy 100% is leaking. And I just run it right in the ground. It's also pretty flexible, but it's obviously leaking somewhere. That'll be a little bit of an interesting discovery to see why that is leaking the way that it is, because it actually looks fine. Maybe it wasn't sealing around the top. So yeah, these guys are going to be a little bit of an investigation. The pump is probably working. I wouldn't worry about it too much. We can always test it later with a bit of fluid, and then you give it a squeeze. Put some fluid down in that hole right there. We'll use here's some WD-40. There we go. See, that guy is That guy's working. We need a bit more to fill the tube for this guy to work, but I think it'll be all right. There we go. Yep. I'd say that pump's probably working fine. A little dirty. It's wet now because we've covered it in fluid, but I'll bet it's probably okay. Just for fun, we'll take it apart. Again, it's going to have a spring under it, same as these guys. So there's your diaphragm. This is the plunger from the other side. Diaphragm with built-in gasket, and it's got a spring behind it, so it's actually pretty well sealed. I don't think I'm going to take it apart. Maybe I will. So there you go, spring, back to the diaphragm. It's important to make sure it goes the right way when you put it in. This part goes down. It's got a little seat for the spring. It sits just like this, right? This little ridge here. Spring goes in there like that. That has to go down into here. Spring sits around that little piece right here, which pulls the fuel. Pushes the fuel. So spring goes around there, sits on here, so this has to go this way like this. So the little turned up washer goes up ways. But and again, all of that stuff comes in the rebuild kit, so if you wanted to replace it, you could. Let's see what I've got. So there's a brand new one. So I think I'll just put that guy in. Since I'm gonna use these carburetors, I'm gonna use that particular guy on there. So we're gonna have that guy, and then it looks like we have a couple of these to replace if I needed to. I'll just have to check him out, make sure he's good. This one, this is what I was saying. You see how it's like there's no flex to that at all. It's just rock hard garbage. I just kept it for this sort of situation. And again, here's all the gaskets and things for the flow bowl. It all comes in the kit. I do have an extra one of those, so that's going to go on. Make sure that everything works nice and good. So that guy's there. And then I've got spare floats. This is what it should look like, but over the years they get tarnished. And there's actually a different version. It's dark brown plastic, which is the ones we have. I don't know when they made that change, but brown versus the white. It might even be the white ones that are the ones that crack. These ones maybe are better. All right, so it looks like we've got a few things. And then in here, I've got the blown up view where all the gaskets go and everything. That also comes in the kit. Little measuring tool from the kit. And then here's all the little gaskets and stuff that come with the kit that fit in various places. I've got extra jets and stuff, you know. So like I was saying, I don't know if you can see, but there's actually quite a bit of difference in length there from the American to the Canadian one. But make sure the Canadian ones go back in. And these are the ones that come in the kit. They're brass and they come with a fabric crush washer. And I just don't find they seal as well as the factory ones. The needle doesn't work as well. But it does come with all those bits and pieces if you get that kit. So it looks like I should have enough pieces to put this back together without having to order a new kit. So that's good. I think what I'll do is do a bit of cleaning on these guys. We're going to have to get all this crud out, which I usually use like a toothbrush, like an old toothbrush works really well. Or if you've got like a small hard bristle paintbrush, you can get down in there and get into the corners and stuff. Like a little one, you know. So that's what I'm going to do. And maybe clean up the outside a little bit. And I'm going to test these guys. So first I'm going to get a container, and I'm going to get these needle valves and stuff all into a container with some fluid to soak in for a little bit, just to get the tarnish off the outside, and clean them up on the interior a little bit, and should be all right after that. Okay, I think I'm actually going to do this as a two-part because it's getting to be late in the day. It's about 5:30. I got to get dinner and stuff ready for the kids, so I think I'm going to do the soaking and the cleaning and that sort of stuff in a second video. So we'll wrap that up for today. So we'll call this disassembly and inspection, and the next video will be cleaning, and then maybe I'll do a third, which is reassembly and testing. So I think that's how we'll do it. So keep an eye out for the next one.